What is the question few people seem to be asking about the war in Iran? Donald Trump says he has the determination and the weapons to keep hitting Iran for another 4 weeks, maybe longer. Israel is a big buyer and producer of weapons, so maybe they too have enough supplies to keep working their way through their long list of targets in the Islamic Republic. But the question I have for my guest, Thomas Juneau, is can Israel keep intercepting, keep defending when Iran has enough drones and missiles to send them by the hundreds every day into Israel, into Oman, into Bahrain, into the United Arab Emirates and Qatar? Do these countries have enough defensive weapons to keep Iran's drones and missiles at bay? I'll come back to Thomas shortly. Will the air defence systems, is the overarching questions you see in action here, determine how long this war actually lasts for and whether the Iranian regime stays in power? So far, missile interceptors have ensured that the damage and the casualties from Iranian strikes have been limited. But they are costly, and at some point supplies will run out. The US and Israel have been targeting drone bases like this one. Iran has been launching waves of these drones across the region, using them to overwhelm defence shields. The Shahed, as they are known, are relatively inexpensive to produce, especially compared to many of the systems used to shoot them down. Viewers on this channel know about the Patriot system sent to Ukraine. One system costs hundreds of millions of dollars on its own. It's state-of-the-art kit, it's really good at bringing down drones and missiles, but it's also really expensive. Ukraine has several of these. They would like many more, but they can't get them. Part of the reason they can't have more is that the US is using them to defend its bases in the Gulf. The same bases that are now under attack. Thomas Juneau is a professor at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. Your research, Thomas, is on the Middle East and in particular Iran and Yemen, with previous experience with Canada's Department of National Defence. Well qualified for this chat, Thomas. Can we start with the wide view, I guess, trying to work out what happens in Iran? Are we right to be looking for answers in this area of weapons stockpiles?
Absolutely. There are multiple variables that will determine where things evolve in the coming days and perhaps weeks. But one of the most important variables that will shape decision-making on both sides is this race, this balance between, on the one side, missiles and drones in Iran, and the capability to intercept them on the American, the Israeli side, but also on the Gulf Arab side. So the American friends in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE. Who will run out first will have a major impact on how long this goes. And that is why, for example, among the main targets that the US and Israel have been focusing on in Iran, are the missile launchers and the stockpiles of missiles to make sure that they get an advantage in that race.
Right. So that alludes to my next question, is that does Iran have enough drones and missiles to keep making life uncomfortable for its neighbours for weeks, or at least as long as Trump says he can keep up the attacks on Iran?
Well, in practice, the challenge is that it's very difficult for you or me to answer that question because most of the numbers are not known publicly. Obviously, in wartime, adversaries do not want the other side to know how much weapons they have left. So on the Israeli side, for example, we don't know what is the stockpile of interceptors. We know that Israel used a lot of these interceptors, for example, in June of 2025 during the 12-day war. Israel used some of them at other instances or rounds of violence against Iran or against Hezbollah in the past. We also know that because of that vulnerability, Israel worked very hard to replenish its stockpiles in the past few months, clearly in anticipation for what is going on now. But exactly how many are left, we don't know. Similar on the Gulf Arab side, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, how many do they have left is also not clear.
Do we know or get some sort of idea in that last war of 2025, how close did Israel get to running out of interceptors?
We don't know that. There were a lot of rumors. How low did Israel go? It's not clear. And sometimes people will focus on certain indicators, but that may be misleading. So, for example, right now there are rumors that Iran may be slowing down some of its missile launches. Is it because it doesn't want to show where its launchers are? Is it because it wants to wait for another element? There's a lot of fog of war right now that prevents us from reaching any kind of firm conclusions. But what is very clear is that, this notion of a race is very important between interceptors and missiles themselves, and it is causing a lot of anxiety on multiple sides.
The Iranian-built Shahed drone famously exported to Russia, taking life and making life really uncomfortable in Ukraine through a cold winter. Is that a singular piece of equipment a major player in this Iranian conflict?
Absolutely. You know, the starting point here is really that the Islamic Republic of Iran has long known that in military terms, it is much weaker than the US and Israel. Fighter aircraft, frigates, submarines, tanks, and so on. And that's why in the past few decades, Iran has really focused on, in particular, missiles and drones, because these are what we can call equalizers, that despite Iran's overall vulnerability, it allows it to threaten to inflict a cost on its adversaries. The missiles have been hugely important, but so have the drones. And that's a bit of a more recent development. We have seen Iran really develop a very strong indigenous capacity to not only build its own drones, to export them. So we've seen, for example, the Houthis in Yemen develop a very strong drone capacity to a large degree thanks to Iran. And as you mentioned, we've also seen Iran export that capacity to Russia, not only selling or providing Russia with drones, but also even going so far as to help Russia building its own drone manufacturing capacity inside Russia for its own war against Ukraine.
Quick context, Thomas. What's being used to typically bring down these drones, and what is the cost of a Shahed drone compared to the cost of a Patriot interceptors?
So the cost of a Shahed drone, which is not the only, but the most common drone that Iran uses, is in the several tens of thousands of American dollars. The precise cost is difficult to say, but we're in that range. An interceptor, whether Patriot or of other types, right? There are multiple types of interceptors, costs about $1 million. Varies a lot, but again, we're in that range. In addition, to shoot down one drone, you will often need more than one interceptor to make sure that you get it, perhaps two or three. So if you only look at the numbers, there's a very clear imbalance here. $2 to $3 million perhaps for two or three interceptors against $50-ish thousand for the drone itself. But that's a bit misleading in this, or incomplete, in the sense that the financial capacities are not the same. Iran is a country, yes, a large country, but strangulated by economic and financial sanctions. Whereas on the Gulf side, Qatar, the UAE, very rich countries, the US, obviously, with a massive defense budget of almost $1 trillion. So yes, these numbers matter in terms of dollar figures, but they do have to be put into a broader context.
So the big question I referred to earlier, how long can these countries keep defending against Iran's weapons? And how long before they might have to put pressure on the US and Israel to stop attacking Iran?
Well, in the case of the Arab Gulf states, we know that they were putting pressure before the war on the US and Israel not to attack, because clearly, and as we're seeing now, no, they're not friends of Iran at all, but they're at the front lines, unlike Israel and even less so the US. As soon as they started being attacked by Iran, they started aligning themselves more closely with the US. They are right now, and this is an important point to make, absolutely furious at Iran. But they have, according to some media reports, already started putting some pressure on the US to seek an off-ramp, because again, they are the ones that are at the front line here. How long can this go? It can go on for a long time. But one thing that I do expect to happen if the war does go on in terms of weeks, which is one possible scenario, a real possible scenario, I would expect the pace of Iranian missiles and drones to somewhat slow down, because there's the interceptor issue on the side of those being shot at. But on the Iranian side, their missile stocks are not endless. They're intermediate missiles, those able to reach Israel, are actually maybe about 2,000 at the beginning of this war, and that is fast going down. Some are being used, some are being destroyed. They're shorter range missiles, so able to reach Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, right across the Persian Gulf. More than that, but not endless as well. So that notion of a race to who runs out of either missiles or interceptors first, how that race is managed by both sides really depends on the difficult calculus of how long they expect this to last.
Is this the pressure point, Thomas, in this conflict, that the game inside the game is that Iran's ability just to keep firing on its neighbours, that might have a say in whether the regime holds on to power?
It is one of the key pressure points, absolutely. Not the only one. In a broader discussion, other variables would come into play, but it is a very key variable. And again, that this point needs to be emphasized. If you look at the target sets by the US and Israel in the early hours of the war, of course, leadership decapitation was a key target, with a significant degree of success, and I expect that to continue. Air defenses were also a key target, right? The US and Israel wanted to achieve air superiority over Iran, the ability to fly over Iranian airspace without being shot at by Iran's own interceptors. Here again, major success. But we have seen a significant proportion of Israeli and American strikes going after drone production factories, drone storage sites, and the same for missiles. And I absolutely expect that to continue to be one of the key priorities. And the reverse, by the way, there were a number of reports that I saw today that I'm withholding definitive judgment because the information is very partial. But there were reports today that Iran itself is targeting the air defenses of its adversaries, notably in the UAE, the report that I saw today. And here you see the reverse logic at play.
One more before we go. The longer this goes on, are we more or less likely to see regime change in Iran, you think?
The longer this goes on, the more we are likely to see regime change. As of now, the Islamic Republic remains in power. It is vulnerable. It is arguably more vulnerable than it's ever been, but it is not, from what we can see from the outside, on the verge of collapse. There is a scenario where Trump stops the war after a few days, basically declares victory, in which case regime change is not the end goal anymore. The Islamic Republic survives in a much weaker form, and there are a lot of questions regarding its future. But if Trump decides to pursue this in a matter of weeks, and perhaps even more than that, every week that goes by, the probability of the Islamic Republic's collapse goes up a bit more every week.
Thomas Juneau is a professor at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. You can read his thoughts on X and many other platforms. Thomas, it was really great to let you flex your knowledge on the region for us. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Big thanks to Thomas Juneau for answering our questions. We'd love a chance to answer yours. Please hit us up in the comments down below. And if you like this content, you like these angles, like and subscribe to the DW News channel, like millions of other news hounds already have. Bye for now.